1, 2, 3, and go. Hello, I'm Christina, and this is Desert Agave Fiber Arts. I'm a Latinx, fat, bipolar writer and fiber artist with PTSD. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I grew up in Wisconsin, but have lived in New Mexico since 1998. I've been a writer since about forever and a fiber artist starting in 2021. I'll tell you more about that as the episode goes on. Exploring my creativity through the fiber arts has really brought me back to my writing and to my creativity in general, and really led me away from trauma and depression and towards joy. In this podcast, I'm going to discuss embroidery, sewing, knitting, spinning, wool processing, mental health, probably a little bit of writing too. I'm not an expert in any of these, but the process of discovery, experimentation, and leaps into the dark have brought me a lot of joy, and I hope to share that with you. I'm going to start today's podcast with what I'm going to call finished object story time. I've been making things with my hands for about 3 years now, so there's an awful lot of finished objects to share. I'm not going to share all of them today. I'm just going to share one. This is pretty special to me because it's what got me started on the fiber arts journey. It's my first embroidery, and I did it back in 2021. It's a pattern designed by Krista West of Avlia Folk Embroidery, and it's the Pennsylvania Posy Kit. And let me tell you a little bit about this. Back in 2021, of course, COVID lockdown was still in place. My son was in the 3rd grade, and he was doing the entirety of 3rd grade online over Google Meet from the den of our house. And I was essentially his unpaid educational assistant, and he didn't like me to be too close, so I wouldn't sit in the den with him. I would sit in the living room in earshot. And I basically spent the whole school day with one ear open, listening for when he might need me to come over and give him a hand. Because he very much needed me sometimes, but he didn't want me all the time, and it became my job to figure out when was when. And this time, sitting in the living room, listening to 3rd grade, I felt like I did 3rd grade for a second time. It was really hard to write, and it was really hard to read. And I really had this feeling like my head was full of words, and it was full, and there wasn't room for more words to come in through reading, and there wasn't really room for words to come out through writing. And I was going pretty stir crazy, sitting there going through 3rd grade for the second time. And it occurred to me that what I really needed was something I could do that didn't involve words. I realized that all of my hobbies were words, and that wasn't working for me anymore. And I read an article in Slate magazine, and in it, it said the perfect pandemic hobby was latch hooking. And I went on Etsy and I searched for latch hooking kits, and well, I didn't really feel that drawn to any of them, but I ended up getting one with Winnie the Pooh on it because I figured my son might enjoy that. And while I was looking at latch hooking kits, I just sort of randomly stumbled across Krista West's Avlia designs. And I thought to myself, those are really beautiful. Like, could I actually make something that beautiful? I wasn't sure, but I got one of those kits too. So they all eventually arrived in the mail. I started with latch hooking and discovered very quickly that I hate latch hooking. The little pieces of yarn were little pieces of acrylic yarn. I didn't like how they felt. I thought the design was kind of ugly. I thought the process was tedious, and it was especially frustrating because I would spend an hour on it, and at the end of it, I just had these ugly little pieces of yarn sticking up from a canvas, and I hated it. So latch hooking didn't last long, but embroidery took. I was a complete wreck at embroidery at first. You can see these stitches aren't particularly wonderful, but I was awfully proud of them. And when I say I was a wreck, I mean that when I started on the first day, I read about how you're supposed to take the floss and separate it into different plies and then just embroider with 2 plies at a time. And I didn't realize that when I had this giant hank of floss that I was also supposed to cut the floss into usable lengths. So my first time I sat down to embroider, I had this huge length of floss and I was trying to separate out the individual plies, and it became a tangled mess very quickly. And I just about threw up my hands and said, I'm obviously too hopeless to do this. But I kept going. I eventually untangled the floss. I think I posted about it on Facebook, and one of my friends who embroiders kindly told me that you're supposed to cut the floss into lengths, and then if it's a length only about this long, it doesn't get tangled as easily. That was genius, I thought. And eventually I got to actually embroidering. Krista West also has videos on YouTube and on her website showing people how to get started, and that helped me a ton as well. And I worked on this, and I was so proud of it when I was done. I'm still proud of it. It's on display in our living room. And even though I've made more skilled embroideries since, this is the one that started it, and I love it for that, the Pennsylvania Posies. The fiber arts didn't take off with me hugely at first. I finished Pennsylvania Posies. I loved it. I loved how peaceful it made me feel when I was working on it, and I loved creating beauty with my hands. But once I was done, I got a second kit, but I kind of put it down after a while, and I spent a little bit of time not working on the fiber arts. But then in 2022, for whatever reason, I picked it back up and I really got into embroidery. I started doing some of Krista West's cross-stitch patterns as well, and that's what really got me going. I haven't really stopped since, and it's all snowballed. Cross-stitching a pillow led me to hand sewing a pillowcase, and that led me to thinking I really ought to get a sewing machine because this hand sewing stuff is not my favorite. And getting a sewing machine led me to sewing, and then sewing eventually led me to knitting, which led me to spinning, which led me to wool processing. And now I spend just as much time as I can just getting completely messy, whether it be metaphorically or literally, and just enjoying myself so much. I'm so thankful for the journey that this embroidery started me on. So that's why I wanted to share it first on this first episode. Next, I'm going to share some of my works in progress. I tried to just pick the ones that I'm actively working on. I have to admit, there's an awful lot of stuff that I'm working on, but these are the things I've worked on in the last couple weeks. First, I have an almost finished object, and that is some socks. These have never been my primary project, but I've been working on them since February or so. Here's one finished sock. It just needs its ends weaved in. And then this one is so close to finished. I'm just binding off the ribbing. And once it's bound off and the ends are woven in, it'll be a finished object. You can see they are not identical twin socks. I didn't try to make the stripes match. They're more sibling socks, but I really love them. I think they're a lot of fun. To tell you a little more about them, the pattern is Practically Perfect Socks by Maple Tree Lane & Co. This was a pattern that was written by an internet friend of mine, Kim. She lives in Australia, and she asked if she could gift me her sock pattern, and I said yes, and I've really been enjoying knitting it. It's a toe up, and the pattern is chatty in a nice way, really guides you through knitting a sock if it's a thing you haven't done before. And it has some help with figuring out your gauge, which helps you fit the sock just right to your foot. And I've really been enjoying it a lot, using her pattern. Really glad she gave it to me. And I've been experimenting this year with knitting socks in different ways. When I started knitting socks, I used DPNs, but I decided this year to try all the different ways of knitting socks just to see what I like best. So this pair, I've been using 2 circulars. These are Haya Sharps. I've got 2 16-inch circulars going here. And I really like Haya Sharps, I've learned this year. I really enjoy the super sharp tip. I don't even mind the cord, which is nylon, rather than the Chow Gu style cord that people like so much. And it's been a lot of fun, but I'll admit that I'm ready to be done with 2 circulars. I get a little tired of how, while I'm working on one circular, the other one's flopping around, getting in my way. I'm looking forward on my next pair of socks to trying another method. I'm not exactly sure what I'll do. I've got some little 9-inch circulars that I want to try, although I admit I'm a little afraid of them. I've already done a pair of Magic Loop socks this year, so I really feel like I probably ought to be brave and do the 9-inch circulars. I know you can't do the entire sock using those, so I'll have to either pair them up with double-pointed needles or Magic Loop to do the fiddly, tricky bits that you can't do with those tiny little needles. Oh, also let me talk to you about the project bag. This is a cute little project bag. I got it off Etsy from Mama Stork Bags. I've got a thing for project bags, I have to admit, and with this one I was drawn to the patchwork and it just makes me happy. I also like that it's closed with a zipper. My house for about 10 years has had a problem with moths. That's kind of a dirty word in the knitting world. But so because of that, I have lots of little bags of lavender and slabs of cedar around my wool. And also I like to keep it sealed up. So I appreciate project bags with a zipper so I can feel like my project is safe. Oh, I forgot to tell you too, the yarn is beautiful yarn. It's self-striping yarn from Woolens and Nosh, the Targhee sock base, and the colorway is stained glass. I love Woolens and Nosh. I started knitting in January of 2023, and very quickly I discovered Woolens and Nosh online, and it's still one of my favorite places to get sock yarn. Just her colorways are gorgeous. I did her Advent socks last Christmas and really enjoyed the heck out of them, and there's my favorite socks that I wear right now. So let me show you the main knitting project that I'm working on right now. This is in another project bag that I love. This one is the Mood. I think it's the extra large. I forget exactly what it's called, but it's a lovely project bag, and I love having my main knitting project in here. I have finished the front of this sweater just this week. It's not for me, it's for my husband. It's a really gorgeous texture. See if I can get, yeah. Made with a really lovely yarn. As soon as I finished the front, I turned around and I cast on the back, just working on the ribbing here. And I cast it on right away because this is hopefully going to be done by the end of June. I'm not sure if I can make it, but I'm going to try awfully hard. The reason why there's a deadline is because it's a UX knit for Jen at One Wild Designs. The pattern is called Who Could Stay, and it's a really nice, just sort of cozy sweater pattern. I'm making it for my husband, as I said. It's the first sweater I knitted for him. I'm knitting for him. And I was kind of afraid I would resent it. Like, most of my making is making garments for me. I weigh over 300 pounds. It's hard for me to find clothes that fit me, especially clothes that I like, made of natural fibers. It's really been powerful for me to learn how to make things for myself. And because clothes can be hard for me to find that I like, I tend to focus my making energies on me. But I just felt like I wanted to make him a sweater, and as I've been working on it, I was happy to discover that I don't resent it. I'm not mad that I'm making something for someone other than me. I am actually really enjoying it, partly because the patterns, texture is so fun, partly because the yarn is just a joy to knit with. I'll tell you more about that in a second. But I think also just because it really is meaningful to make something for people who I love. That yarn that I showed you is Forest Lane Fiber Co.'s Urbane Bronze color in the Rambouillet Sport. It's a woolen spun 2-ply yarn. It's really fun to knit with. It's bouncy. It's sort of thick and thin in the spinning. It just feels alive in a way that I am enjoying an awful lot. And I'm knitting it using Chow Goose and again, keeping it in my mood project bag. And this is the main project I'm working on, because if this thing's gonna get done by the end of June, then I need to spend a lot of time working on it, which I am. I've got one more nearly finished object. This is in another beautiful project bag. This is one made by Krista Jekyll. I'll put the links for all of these down in the info area, but it's another zipper bag too, so I know everything's safe in here. Before I show you the thing I'm working on, I'll show you his buddy. I asked my son if I could borrow Frog to show off on my first podcast episode. He said I could, but he said Frog could not spend the whole night in a project bag with a half-made toad. He said that Frog had to sleep in the bedroom with me, and I needed to keep him company, so I did. And then he got up with me early in the morning, and here he is. I'm really proud of him. Making these frog and toad patterns, it's related to sock knitting. I call them very fussy socks, knitted at a very tight gauge. And when I started Frog, I said that if I could pull him off, I would no longer consider myself a beginning knitter. So I pulled him off. Wasn't easy, but I did it. It even involved doing a little bit of steeking to get his eyeballs in. So I'm no longer calling myself a beginning knitter. So that's kind of fun. But let me show you Toad. Toad is off the needles. He's kind of a zombie toad right now, though. He doesn't have a face. He doesn't have any stuffing, but he's got hands and feet, a little head. I really need to finish him soon because I've promised my son for months that he would be done soon. You can see he's a little bit shorter than Frog, which makes sense. Frog and Toad are not the same size. So very soon, maybe tomorrow, I need to finally get brave and do the eyes. The eyes are the next step, and that's why I've been putting them off, because I still find the steeking and the getting the eyes in a little bit scary. The pattern for Frog and Toad is made by Frog and Cast, and I'm using yarn from a kit that they sell on their website. It's I was a little surprised I was able to do it, but once I realized it was a lot like sock knitting, it all kind of clicked into place. The thing that makes it hard, though, is you're using US size 1 needles, and but you're using DK weight yarn, so you're knitting at a really tight gauge, and that's it's just hard on the hands. I can't work on either of them for really long. I've been using these #1 needles. They're from Signature Needle Arts. I like them a lot, and even though I've been using other methods to make socks this year, I'm really grateful I started making socks on double-pointed needles, because without that skill, I definitely wouldn't have been able to make Frog and Toad. And Frog and Toad are special for our family. My son is now a preteen, but our whole family still loves Frog and Toad. When he was very, very little, my husband and I would both read him those stories basically every day. And then when he learned to read himself, those were the first stories that he'd read on his own. And those stories are so special to us that he calls his dad Frog. He's called his dad Frog since he was 2. It's just what his dad is called these days. And he used to call me Mrs. Frog, which I admit I didn't totally love. But these days he calls me Mom, which is fine with me. But his dad is still Frog. And when I saw the frog and cast pattern for Frog and Toad, I knew I had to make them for him. It was just sort of an obvious thing. So even though making toys is definitely not my thing, I've been glad to do it for my son. I've also been working on spinning. I'll introduce you to my main wheel properly, I think, on the next episode. It's a Magicraft Suzy Pro that kind of fell in my lap through luck and friendship. But this is what I've been spinning on her right now. This is actually a finished bobbin. I'm working on the pear right now. I'm attempting to make sock yarn. I don't know if I'm succeeding. This is a spin using a blend of Shetland wool and silk. I was hoping that the silk would lend a little strength to the wool and make for good sock yarn. That's why I decided to try it. I'm just doing a 2-ply, so this will be 1-ply. I'm almost done with the second bobbin, which will be the 2nd ply. I got the roving from Skagit Woolen Works, and this color is mocha, and I've really been enjoying working with it. It's just a super fun spin. I do most of my spinning as the sun rises. Today, instead of spinning, I decided to make this podcast. But this time of day when the light is slowly coming up and everyone else is still asleep is very sacred to me for my making. I just do what my heart calls me to do during this time, try not to worry about what I should do, and often early in the morning, that's spinning. And then this final project is the one where I absolutely know the least about what I'm doing. Like, I know so little. And that is, I am trying to process a fleece. It's a Shetland fleece. It's from a sheep named Zella. I got Zella's fleece off of Etsy. Don't really know what I'm doing. And in retrospect, I think Zella, she doesn't have that much VM, that's short for vegetable matter, but she has an awful lot of mud. Zella the sheep clearly had a good time rolling in the mud. Happy for her, but I've been having a heck of a time dealing with it. Let me show you. Let's see. Yes, this is some of Zella's unscoured fleece. This is her neck and back wool. This is actually less dirty than some, but she's a white sheep, and you can see how much dirt is there. I've got another bag full that's labeled extra dirty that is way dirtier than this, if you can imagine it. So I've been trying to figure out what to do. I have experimented with washing a few batches of her fleece. I discovered that pre-soaking, preferably for about 48 hours, works the best, and then scouring with 2 or 3 baths. I've been using Unicorn Power Scour, and that seemed to work all right. But even after that, it's still, there's still a lot of dirty tips on Zella. This is this is after scouring, and you can see it's a little cleaner, but those tips, those dirty, dirty tips, I spent so much time trying to figure out what to do about them. I obviously couldn't get them out just from scouring. I searched, and I found a woman who demonstrated sort of scouring and flicking at the same time. She said if you do it carefully, it won't felt, and she was right. This is probably the most effective method. It was really messy because I don't have a utility sink, so I just had to do it with buckets of water out here at in my what I call my wool workshop. And it's beautiful and glowing white. All the dirt is gone from the tips. but it was so time intensive. It took forever to do this and maybe 5 other little locks. I just can't see doing it to Zella's entire fleece. I'm just not sure I have the patience. But look how that glows. This is what Zella looks like without all the mud. I was watching another podcast done by Melly Knits, and I started laughing at myself because she actually shared what she does about dirty tips. And she demonstrated how she picks the wool apart before she cards it. And when she comes to a dirty tip, she pulls it out and discards it. And that made me laugh so hard because I was working so hard to figure out how to get these dirty tips clean. And it turns out that, you know, one of the best wool processors out there, Melly, you pull them out, you throw them away. That cracked me up. So I've been doing that and carding some little rowlegs to spin with. They're not quite as beautiful and glowing as the lock that I sort of washed and flicked at the same time, but it's more sustainable, so I think this is what I'm gonna do. I do feel like I'm getting some little neps in here as I card it by hand, and I haven't been sure if that's because my hand carders are too coarse or if it's because I didn't quite get all the lanolin out. I was just hearing yesterday on a podcast that if you have some lanolin in the wool, that leads to it getting neps. So I'm still figuring out what the heck I'm doing, but at least I have about 15 of these ready to spin. I need to keep working. And if I really throw up my hands with Zella and her muddy good time, I have to admit I've also got another Shetland fleece, this one dark gray from Ramona, from a different farm, also procured off Etsy. And then there's also another fleece from a nice sheep called Chainsaw, and that one's a Romney. And I've got another one coming probably at the end of the month. So I'm kind of in over my head with the wool scouring and wool processing, but I am having a fabulous time. I was so inspired by the whole wool processing process that this is our sunroom where we live. Half of it's a really nice seating area. Half of it was basically where we kept our junk because houses in Albuquerque don't tend to have basements. And I decided to reclaim the space. So I organized it a little bit, got rid of the junk, and this half of the sunroom, I now call it my wool workshop. You can see behind me, there's a table where my wool processing chaos lives. I've also got, I just got this recently for scanning my yarn because why not? It's an antique, but I'm gonna use it for real. So that's pretty fun. And it just gives me, I can't even describe how it feels to have my own space in the house for my woolly chaos. It brings me such happiness. And it's where I spend my time in the early mornings if I'm not spinning usually. This room doesn't have heating in the winter or cooling in the summer, and this is New Mexico, it gets hot. But if I come in here at 5 a.m., open up the screen door, open up the window, it's nice and cool and lovely. And then once it gets hot later in the day, I just do other things. Okay, that is all of my works in progress that I'm actually actively working on right now. I guess that's plenty. Looking at it, I can see why sometimes I have trouble getting things done. I think that's part of why I enjoy test knits and UX knits is even though the deadline can kind of stress me out, it makes sure that I actually get something done. Because as much as I enjoy the process of making, I do also enjoy the end result. I like both. As far as future plans go, in the month of June, I plan to get back to my sewing. I hadn't been doing much sewing recently, but I just started kind of joining in with a sew-along informally that's going on at the One Wild Designs forum online. And there's other people sewing. It's really inspiring. I made a blue linen apron a week or so ago. And now I'm going to be working on making some linen tunics. This thing I'm wearing right here is a dress. It's the Melba dress by Muna and Broad. I will talk more about that design company in other episodes, I'm sure. I basically learned how to sew from Muna and Broad. I love this dress. It's made out of linen. It's very airy and light. I'm not going to make more Melba dresses, but I'm going to shorten it and make some Melba tunics, I've decided. I've got the linen pre-washed and waiting for me. Next, I need to cut out some pattern pieces. Haven't done it yet. Well, again, it's something that has to be done in the early wee hours of the morning because I do it here in the sunroom. Don't want to be cutting when it's too hot later on. There's a table tennis table in here that mostly is just folded up and we use it as a room divider. But when I want to cut out fabric, I just lay out the table tennis table flat and it's a huge, lovely space for me to cut on, but I hate cutting. It's my absolute least favorite part of sewing. I'm not really a process sewist, I'm a product sewist. I love the product. I love these beautiful linen clothes I can make myself. I don't like very many parts of sewing except for my sewing machines. I'll tell you more about them in another episode, but they're old. I've got a few sewing machines and they're all old, venerable ladies, and I love them so much. Okay, another thing I want to do in June is make a plan for the Tour de Fleece. For those who don't know, every year during the Tour de France, which is a bike race that my husband loves to watch, the spinning community likes to do a Tour de Fleece where people spin every day that the riders ride, and sometimes people form informal teams, and it's just sort of a fun community thing. And I'd like to take part this year. I tend to be kind of a random spinner. Spinning, I'm all about process, and I end up with very little product because I tend to have many different little projects going on. But I want to pick a project to focus on during Tour de Fleece, possibly spinning up Zella if I can get some more of her fleece processed, possibly something else, I'm just not sure. I'm also debating between if I want to do it on my wheels or if I just learned how to support spindle, maybe I'll focus on that for the Tour de Fleece. Just don't know, but I need to figure it out. And then my other future plan is just, of course, like I said, I'm going to be spending this month focusing the vast majority of my making time on my UX knit, Who Could Stay. And once that's done, I'm really going to try hard not to sign up for more test knits for a while. I like the deadlines, but I think I need some no deadline time. I really want to spend July working on just whatever the heck my heart pulls me towards. I was even thinking of taking a break from garment knitting. I won't stop knitting. I've been knitting every day since I started knitting in January of 2023. I can't function without it. It's what gets my head level. But I was thinking it might be really fun to just spend July working on socks or little things, see what I can get finished when that's my main focus instead of the sock is just my side project that I work on when it's too big and bulky to carry a big sweater around town with me. I don't know, but that's definitely, I don't know exactly what I'll do in July, but I know that I want it to be whatever I want without any outside deadlines. So, and as far as socks go too, I really want to try a Summer Lee pattern. She has a book that came out recently that I have, and so many of her patterns look like fun. I want to do one of them. So that's kind of my future plans. And then for the final part of this podcast, I wanted to do a section I'm going to call Mental Health, Reading and Writing. And like I said, I started knitting in 2023. And one of the reasons I picked it up in January of 2023 was because Krista West, the designer for embroidery and cross stitch that I've mentioned before, she also writes, and she occasionally has articles published in magazines, especially Taproot magazine. And in one of her articles, I read something that really intrigued me, which was that there have been actual studies done on knitting that show that knitting is really good for people with trauma, people with PTSD, that it even has similar effects on them as EMDR therapy. And I thought that was fascinating. And that was actually before my PTSD diagnosis, but you know, I kind of knew. I kind of knew that I had trauma that I was trying to work through. And I just thought, well, I know that knitting's probably not the only craft that is good for trauma, but something about the fact that it was sort of the official one that had been studied, I was like, I'm just going to pick it up and I'm going to try. And there were other reasons why I picked up knitting, but that was a big one. And I just really quickly was amazed by how much I loved it. Part of it is that it's much more portable and flexible than anything else I've done. Embroidery is fairly portable, but I need to take my glasses off to do it and hold it right up in my face. And something about putting my glasses on and off makes it feel like a less flexible hobby for me. Sewing, obviously, you're tied to your machines. You have to do it in a specific place. But knitting, I mean, I can do it while watching TV. I can do it while in a waiting room while my son's in an appointment. I can do it anywhere, anytime, and it is so pleasurable for me. Just the meditative aspect of it is amazingly soothing. And so I'm writing an article. I just finished it actually, but I was writing an article about spinning and mental health. And I wanted to learn more about this idea about crafting being good for mental health and good for processing trauma. And I couldn't really find much more about it. So finally I emailed Krista West herself and I just asked her for more information. And she was really gracious and really lovely. And she sent me an email back with some info in her own words. And then she also suggested a couple books, which I have now read. And here's a little bit of what Krista said in her email to me. She said, there is research that knitting and crafting are biomodal therapies, similar to EMDR. Using both of your hands in a coordinating effort that crosses the body is thought to help process trauma and move it from the limbic system into the prefrontal cortex, where it can be integrated into a person's timeline, thereby setting trauma in the past. And I thought the way she summed that up was beautiful, and it makes perfect sense, because part of why trauma and PTSD is so debilitating is because people have these flashbacks to their trauma, and in the moment you feel like it's still happening. It doesn't feel like it's something that happened in the past, and that can be terrible in many ways. And I've definitely found that while crafting, especially knitting for me, although sometimes with others, sometimes while I'm doing it, if I'm in the right place, I'll just sort of let my mind drift. And while my mind drifts, sometimes it goes to those hard places. And something about thinking about those hard times while knitting keeps me grounded. I'm not back in that time as if it's happening right now. I'm remembering it. And I do feel like that has helped me put some of my trauma in the past instead of constantly experiencing it in the present. And that's amazing. It's so powerful. And I've been reading, Betsan Corkhill wrote a book called Knitting for Health and Wellness. It's pretty accessible, written for the layperson. I've also been reading The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk, which is it's keeping it heavy, not keeping it light. But I listened to that on audiobook over the past month, and both of those things helped me write my article, also helped me think about my own crafting. I should add, obviously, I am not a mental health professional, not even like slightly close. I am just a person who's bipolar and has PTSD and has found that these things are helping me. Please don't take it as any kind of medical advice. Just take it as another fellow person in the world experimenting and trying to figure out what works for her. But yeah, for me, these fiber arts, making things with my hands, have been so powerful in processing my trauma. And even beyond trauma, it's taken me towards joy. I just heard somewhere recently, I can't remember where, that there have also been studies that show that making something concrete with your hands, and it has to be something you can hold, can't be something on a computer screen. Produces serotonin. Like, you just holding something that you made makes you feel happy. And I don't really need a study to tell me that. It's absolutely true. From the first time I held something that I made, I was shocked by just sort of the joy that rushed through me. And I just wanted to experience it again. And I guess that's why I've spent so much time making over the past 3 years. It's really become sort of my driving passion. And I'm still a writer. But for me, the making feeds the writing in a way that I never would have expected. Back in graduate school, my favorite graduate professor and mentor, in his writing workshops, he would tell us we needed, if we were going to be kind of real writers, we needed to be writing at least 18 hours a week. And that was kind of a big ask. I only ever pulled it off while I was in grad school and had that kind of time for it. It was also before I had a kid. And I kind of used to beat myself up because I never really, after grad school, managed to write for 18 hours a week. I felt like, I guess that means I'm not a real writer, but I kept trying. And now I just, that 18-hour thing, I don't know. I do think that if I take all of my creative practices into play, my spinning, my knitting, my wool processing, my sewing, my embroidery, I absolutely am enmeshed in the creative space for more than 18 hours a week. I don't know how many hours, I haven't kept track, but I am positive it is way more than 18. And then when I sit down to write, which is nowhere near 18 hours a week, it just kind of comes. It's like I don't have to fight to get into that creative place. I'm already there, and I can have a fairly short, just sort of hour-long writing session, and so much gets done. Look, I don't know if that works for other people, but it absolutely works for me. And I've been learning to really honor all of my creative practices. And I no longer think of writing as sort of like the real thing that I should be doing and the other things as the fake things. They are all the real thing. And so happy that I found this way of being with my writing. It just feeds it in a way that it hasn't been fed in a long time. Okay, I guess I'm gonna wrap up. So I'm going to try to release an episode every 2 weeks or so. We'll see. I'm completely new at this. I don't know how long it's going to take me to figure out how the heck to edit this or any of that, but I'm going to try my best. Please do subscribe if you aren't already, and comment. I would love to get comments. I really, part of why I'm doing this is that I've been watching podcasts over the past year, and I just really wanted to start taking part in the conversations. So please help me have the conversation. It'll make me so happy. There's some people I want to thank. First of all, I have 35 subscribers as of today, even though I haven't released a single episode yet. I'm so thankful to all 35 of you, because of you, making this doesn't feel like talking into the void. It feels like talking to 35 people. And about half of you are friends that I know in person, and about half of you are people that maybe I know a little bit through the internet, maybe people I don't know at all. But every single one of you, thank you. Thank you so much for letting me talk to you and not just talk to my phone. Really happy about that. Also, I want to thank a local graphic designer, David Wilson, who designed my fabulous Desert Agave Fiber Arts logo. I love it so much. When I finally decided I was going to do this podcast, I just immediately thought to myself, I have to have a logo. And I don't want it to be a ball of yarn with 2 sticks sticking out of it. I want it to be something really special. And he helped make that for me, and I'm so thankful that he did. And then finally, I just again want to thank you, the very specific you, whether you're one of my 35 initial subscribers or someone who kind of stumbled across this because of the algorithm on YouTube, or maybe someone linked you to it. I just want to thank you for being here. I really have enjoyed spending this time with you in the early morning as the day is rising, and I hope you'll come back and join me in a couple weeks. Thank you so much. In the meantime, If you want, you can find links to things I've written on my author website. It's KristinaSokoroJovovich.com. I'll have the link below. Or you can find me on Instagram at @CJovovich. Again, I'll link that below. Thank you so much, and goodbye.